Okay, so Cortez is out with the Green New Deal, and there's basically two parts to it. You've got the regulatory side and the spending side. The proposals for new spending, a lot of people have been wondering where the money's going to come to pay for that, because where the government is already running a over $1 trillion deficit projected every year now going forward, and a lot of this looks pretty expensive. She proposes, kind of overhauling or rebuilding every building in the United States. That sounds like kind of a lofty goal. But needless to say, it would cost quite a bit of money. So nonetheless, I mean, let's say, let's give her the benefit of the doubt and say these are all worthwhile investments. Perhaps we could just raise taxes in order to pay for a lot of this. If only, however, there wasn't the regulatory side of the plan, which necessarily would reduce tax revenue. Now, the reason for this is that the regulations put pretty strict restrictions on pollution and carbon emissions and things of that nature, and by reducing carbon emissions to zero over the next 10 years, you are eliminating every form of cheap and cost-effective energy production in the United States. So if you do that and all that's left over are the renewables, which are all more expensive, then you're necessarily reducing the productive capacity of the economy, because if fuel energy is the lifeblood of the economy. So if your energy gets more expensive, you will be able to afford less energy, and therefore you'll be able to produce less. And so if the economy is producing less, and the economy is shrinking, then the government has less of an economy to tax. So raising taxes would not increase revenue necessary, to the extent that you would need to pay for all these infrastructure programs. So either way, this plan is going to need to increase the deficit substantially. Now, what's the problem with that then? A lot of the people who are around Cortez, the academic side, people like Professor Stephanie Kelton, have been saying, well, this is fine. We have our newfangled modern monetary theory, and that lets us just print as much money as we want, and that's not a problem. It will never cause inflation. And that is complete nonsense. Countries which have tried this in the past, every single one of them, without fail, have always gone broke. The reason for this is that when you print more of your own money, it becomes less scarce. If you print, if you start with $100, okay, and somebody gives you $10, you value those last $10 that you received less than your first $10, okay? So to say that the government can afford anything by just printing more money is neglecting the fact that with every dollar you print, you're able to buy less. Now, of course, what I'm saying is true in the abstract, but the argument really comes into to what extent will this be the case. The MMT crowd, who are pushing for really unlimited deficit spending, think that inflation may be a problem, but probably won't. I'm of the opinion that it may be a problem and probably will be. The reason I say this is that when the government issues debt that's denominated in U.S. dollars, a currency that it can print, there is a general understanding on the part of investors who are buying these bonds that the U.S. will not just debase their currency and print money to pay back the bondholders. That's why in so many other countries that aren't the U.S., debt is issued to them. The loans that they take out are denominated not in their own currency, but typically in U.S. dollars. And the reason for this is so that those smaller countries are unable to actually print their way out of debt. Their creditors know that they are a risk if they issue them loans denominated in a currency that they can print. The only reason the U.S. is able to get away with that is because people understand that they won't do that. So as soon as the U.S. starts openly printing money to buy its own debt, well, then the investors are going to wise up to this and stop buying U.S. debt. So then, at that point, the only people left who will be buying all this debt to finance the massive deficit from, not only the military and the entitlement programs that we already have, but all from this brand new infrastructure project. The only buyer left will be the Federal Reserve. And so, if the Federal Reserve is just printing money 24 hours a day to finance every function of the federal government, well, then I think at that point it's pretty safe to say we're going to end up with pretty bad inflation. Because not only would people flee U.S. debt denominated in dollars, but banks around the world would stop issuing loans to companies and countries outside the U.S. denominated in dollars, because dollars would be less scarce. And if the rest of the world doesn't have debt denominated in dollars, then they have no reason to export goods to us in exchange for dollars, which currently is a big reason why we don't have much inflation in the United States. Here in the United States, unlike in the rest of the world, because the rest of the world has debts denominated in dollars and they can't print dollars, the rest of the world has to produce goods and then export them to the U.S. in exchange for dollars so that they can pay back their loans. This gives Americans the exorbitant privilege of really being able to get a lot of goods for nothing. The government is able to spend more than it otherwise would without having to raise taxes or create inflation, because all these countries around the world really have to work to earn dollars, and so we can just export all the dollars that we inflate every year. If the creditors in the rest of the world no longer see the dollar as a safe store of value, then they're going to stop issuing loans denominated in dollars, and then we will no longer have a place to export our inflated dollars to. All those dollars that will be printed every year, paying for every dollar that's spent by the federal government, will be trapped in the U.S., and that will exacerbate our inflation problem. So all in all, even though the MMT people may claim that inflation is not a problem now, that doesn't mean that it won't be in the future. So in essence, there is no plan to pay for the Green New Deal, other than just to steal the money from savers by inflating everyone's money away.